The desert at night is not silent, it breathes. Listen long enough, and you will hear it, not as the human ear hears a city's hum or a forest rustle, but as the soul hears the shifting of ages. A faint hiss as wind brushes over the dunes. A sigh when a crest collapses under its own weight. Somewhere far off, the soft patter of sand sliding into a hollow it has not visited in centuries. Above, the stars do not merely shine. They watch. The sky in the desert is a cathedral without walls, without end. So vast that even the brightest constellations seem like tiny lamps in an infinite hall. The moon, pale and cold, throws silver shadows across the rippling landscape, tracing each ridge, each hollow, as though unveiling the surface of another world. Here, under this sky, the boundaries between the real and the imagined blur. Travelers have long said that in the deepest hours of night, the dunes speak. Their voices are low and wordless, but they carry memories of caravans that once passed, of footsteps long since erased, of cities that stood where now only the wind roams. Among these whispers, one story returns again and again, the tale of a city made of gold. No one agrees on its name. In some tongues it is the city of the sun, in others, the shining fortress, or simply the place that was. To some, it is a merchant's exaggeration, told to quicken the steps of buyers and sell maps at a higher price. To others, it is a promise, a reward for those who brave the desert's thirst and the sun's unblinking glare. Legends paint it as a place where rooftops blazed under the midday sun, where streets glittered not with dust, but with coin. Markets never slept. Silk hung from the stalls like flowing water. The scent of spice clung to the air so strongly that travelers carried it home on their clothes, proof of where they had been. And at the city's heart, a palace stood, whose walls were inlaid with gold leaf so fine it caught the smallest light, turning twilight into dawn. But like all things of beauty, it came with shadows. The oldest stories do not tell only of wealth. They speak of arrogance, of a people who believed they could buy their way out of nature's reach, of rulers who thought themselves untouchable. Some versions say the city angered the gods, others tell of a curse, passed down from a queen betrayed by her own blood. Still others hint at a slow creeping doom, the kind that arrives without fanfare, until one day the streets are empty, the wells dry, the gates open to the wind. What all versions share is the ending. The desert came. Some say it came in a single night, carried by a storm that blotted out the stars, burying towers and temples in suffocating sand. Others believe it came quietly, grain by grain, until the city's walls became hills and its rooftops dunes. No matter the version, the result is the same. The golden city was swallowed, erased from sight, and left to sleep beneath the desert's shifting skin. Generations later, its memory survives only in fragments, carved into stone tablets no one can fully read, written in the fading margins of travelogues, or passed down by word of mouth among nomadic tribes who still roam the borderlands. To these tribes, the city is not merely history, it is a warning. The desert gives nothing for free, and whatever it takes, it keeps. Yet for every warning, there is a dreamer. For every skeptic who scoffs, there is an explorer, a scholar, or a wanderer who listens to the wind and hears an invitation. They believe that somewhere beneath these dunes lies a treasure greater than any legend has dared to tell, not just gold or jewels, but the chance to touch a piece of the past, so perfectly preserved it might feel alive. And so the search never ends. Even tonight, as the sand shifts under the moon's watch, there are those who walk the desert with quiet determination. They carry maps copied from older maps, their ink smudged by many hands. They carry old journals, whose pages smell faintly of dust and leather, and deep in their hearts, they carry the image of golden towers just beyond the horizon, waiting. The desert does not give them answers. Instead, it offers tests, heat by day, cold by night, and distances that seem to stretch the more you walk. The wind erases footprints within minutes. The dunes themselves seem to change shape, as if moving in slow tides, making landmarks untrustworthy. But perhaps that is the point. For those who seek the Golden City are not merely chasing wealth, they are chasing proof that the past can be touched, that stories are not always lies, and that somewhere under the same stars we see tonight, something wondrous still waits. If you stand in the desert long enough, listening, you might hear it too. A whisper, a suggestion, a call from beneath the sand, so faint you cannot tell if it comes from far away or from inside your own mind. It says nothing you can translate, yet you understand. Somewhere, the city sleeps, and the desert keeps the key. Stories are the threads that bind centuries together. Some threads are bright and unbroken, passed from one generation to the next with care. Others are frayed, tangled, and nearly lost, leaving only hints of the tapestry they once formed. The legend of the Golden City belongs to both kinds. Preserved in some voices, distorted in others, yet always persistent, as though the desert itself refuses to let it vanish completely. Long before maps could be drawn with precision, long before ink was fixed onto parchment, there were the storytellers. They sat by fires, under skies, untouched by city smoke, their faces lit by flame, their voices carrying words into the dark. Among Bedouin tribes, the tale of the city was not merely entertainment, it was inheritance. The elders spoke of it in hushed tones, not as a place one might casually visit, but as a sacred memory. In these tribal accounts, the city had no single fixed location. Sometimes it lay beyond the farthest oasis, where the dunes turned red at sunset. Other times, it was said to be buried in a valley between black cliffs, hidden from the sun for most of the day. Its position shifted like a mirage, as though the city itself moved to evade those unworthy of finding it. The oldest versions do not even call it golden in the literal sense. They speak instead of a city whose beauty was like gold, radiant, warm and untouchable. Its walls glowed at dawn, its people walked with pride, dressed in colors so vivid that travelers compared them to gemstones. The true wealth, these versions suggest, was not in metal or coin but in knowledge, scrolls, sacred texts, and the mastery of crafts long forgotten. Yet, over time, the emphasis changed. Traders who carried the story across borders reshaped it for foreign ears. In the bustling markets of Damascus, Baghdad and Cairo, the story grew brighter and more extravagant. Merchants spoke of gold dust so fine it clung to one's hands like pollen, of coins stamped with symbols no one could decipher, of temples whose domes outshone the midday sun. These retellings were part truth, part lure, for in the competitive world of trade, a story was a form of currency. If a merchant hinted at knowing the route to such a city, even in jest, it could draw attention to his wares. Buyers, intrigued by the romance of distant lands, would lean in closer, linger longer, and perhaps spend more. In this way, the Golden City became both a legend and a marketing tool, a myth polished to gleam like the very treasure it described. Outside the Arab world, the story took on new names and shapes. Along the Silk Road, Chinese chroniclers wrote of a city of light far to the west, whose rulers were said to have tamed the desert winds. In Persia, poets described a place where gardens bloomed year-round, watered by an underground river that never ran dry. In medieval Europe, the tale merged with other myths, the quest for Prester John's kingdom, the dream of faraway El Dorados, until the Golden City became part of a global web of imagined Edens. But even as the story spread, some accounts resisted embellishment. In the heart of the desert, among those who still roamed the sands, the warnings remained. Elders told of travelers who sought the city and did not return, their bones swallowed by the dunes. The city, they said, did not wish to be found. It punished greed and rewarded only those who came with pure intent, though no one could agree on what pure truly meant. One particularly haunting variation comes from a tribe whose name has faded from records. In their version, the city was not built by men at all, but by beings older than humankind, who shaped gold as easily as clay. These beings, displeased with human arrogance, abandoned the city and covered it with sand, leaving it as a test. If humanity could find it again without destroying itself, it would be allowed to remain. If not, it would vanish forever. Historians and archaeologists, of course, approach these accounts differently. To them, the layers of myth may conceal a real settlement, a lost trade hub perhaps, or a fortified caravanserai whose memory was enlarged over centuries of retelling. They note that the desert's shifting nature can erase entire towns, leaving behind only the faintest traces, a few stones here, a broken shard of pottery there. In this light, the legend becomes not a fantasy but a coded memory of something real. Yet the balance between skepticism and belief is delicate. Too much doubt, and the magic of the story dissolves. Too much faith, and one risks chasing shadows across a landscape designed to mislead. It is in this space, between the provable and the possible, that the legend thrives. As centuries passed, the fragments of the story scattered. Some were carved into stone, their script weathered, but still legible. Others were hidden in manuscripts, buried in archives where dust has kept them company for hundreds of years. And some live only in the spoken word, reshaped each time they are told, like a melody played by countless musicians across time. The persistence of the legend raises a quiet question: why has it endured when so many other stories have faded? Perhaps it is because it speaks to something universal, the longing for a place untouched by decay, where beauty and abundance are eternal. Or perhaps it is because the desert itself seems to conspire with the tale, offering just enough clues to keep hope alive while withholding the rest. Even today, in small coffee houses at the edge of the desert, you can hear it. A traveler will lean forward, lower his voice, and speak of an uncle, a friend, a guide who once saw something strange beyond the dunes. A glint at sunset, a row of stones too regular to be natural. The story begins again, as it has for thousands of years, and the listener feels the pull, that ancient invitation to seek, to wander, to believe, and always, at the heart of it, there is the same image: a city waiting beneath the sand, patient as stone, shining in the mind if not in the sun. To understand the legend of the Golden City, one must first understand the stage upon which it could have existed, a stage shaped not only by sand and wind, but by the ambitions of empires. The desert, though seemingly empty, has never truly been a void. It has always been a frontier, a threshold between worlds, the fertile lands where rivers and crops sustain life, and the arid expanse where survival is a daily negotiation with nature. Over thousands of years, kingdoms rose and fell along this shifting boundary, each leaving behind footprints that the sand has only partially erased. To the far west, the ancient Egyptians brushed the desert's edge, their caravans, heavy with gold from Nubia, spices from Punt, and cedar from Lebanon, sometimes pushed beyond the familiar oases into lands less charted. To the east, the mighty Persians extended their influence deep into arid zones, building roads that stitched together vast stretches of their empire. The Nabateans, masters of water and trade, carved cities like Petra into stone, proving that even in harsh climates, splendor could flourish. The desert was never a barrier to these empires. It was a challenge, a filter that allowed only the strongest or most resourceful to pass. And if the Golden City existed, it likely owed its survival and its eventual disappearance to this selective nature. From Egypt to Mesopotamia, the lifeblood of empires was trade. The Silk Road, famous for connecting east and west, was not a single road but a network of routes, many of which cut through desert terrain. Along these arteries flowed more than goods, ideas, religions, languages, and of course stories. A whispered tale in a Persian market could travel to a Roman outpost within months, carried in the minds and mouths of merchants. The legend of a city made of gold, hidden beyond the dunes, would have found fertile ground in such a world. Historical records speak of lesser-known kingdoms that thrived in the margins, oasis states, fortified trade towns, and tribal confederations that rose to power through control of scarce resources. Water was more valuable than any precious metal, and those who commanded its supply could dictate the movement of caravans, the growth of settlements, and the prosperity of entire regions. A city with abundant water in the heart of the desert would have been more than a marvel, it would have been a geopolitical prize. Some scholars point to the kingdom of Sheba, famed for its wealth, and the legendary queen who captivated Solomon. Though rooted in southern Arabia, Sheba's trade networks reached deep into the desert interior, and its wealth was as much in incense and myrrh as in gold. Others suggest the Golden City could have been linked to the lost kingdom of Ubar, described by medieval Islamic geographers as a rich and mighty place that vanished in a single night, swallowed by the sands as divine punishment. Still, there is a difference between kingdoms recorded in chronicles and those existing only in whispers. Empires kept meticulous records when it served them: taxes, tributes, treaties. A city as wealthy as the Golden City should, by that logic, appear somewhere in official accounts. The absence of such a mention is puzzling. Was it deliberately omitted, perhaps kept secret by those who profited from it? Or did it lie outside the reach of the great powers, independent and thus unworthy of their scribes' ink? Geography offers further clues. The deserts of North Africa and Arabia are not uniform seas of sand. They are mosaics of rocky plateaus, shifting dunes, dry riverbeds, and hidden basins. Some areas are deceptively hospitable, offering enough water and vegetation to sustain life if one knows where to look. Ancient caravan routes often zigzagged between these pockets, creating a network of lifelines invisible to outsiders. The Golden City, if real, may have been anchored to one such hidden lifeline, thriving in secrecy, while the world's great empires turned their eyes elsewhere. But the desert's gifts are fragile. A single shift in climate, a riverbed drying, a spring turning brackish, can collapse a settlement's stability. History is filled with examples. The once thriving Garamantian civilization of the Sahara, which built underground irrigation channels to farm the desert, vanished when its water sources failed. The Nabateans, whose cities dazzled travelers, eventually faded as trade routes shifted and Rome's grip tightened. If the Golden City stood among such neighbors, it too would have been vulnerable to the slow erosion of its lifelines. And yet, vulnerability alone does not explain disappearance without trace. Empires crumble, cities fall, but stones remain. Ruins endure for centuries, even millennia, as silent witnesses. For a city to vanish so completely that even its location is uncertain, suggests forces beyond mere neglect, forces like deliberate concealment or the relentless, patient hand of the desert itself. Here lies one of the most compelling contrasts in the story. The desert as both destroyer and preserver. While wind and sand can erase surface structures within decades, they can also protect what lies beneath, sealing it away in dry, airless chambers. Wooden beams do not rot, cloth does not mold, paint does not fade. In this way, the Golden City, if buried, may not be gone at all but merely sleeping, perfectly preserved under a blanket of sand. The great empires of the past had their own relationships with the desert's mysteries. Pharaohs sent expeditions not only for gold but for rare minerals, exotic animals, and sacred incense, sometimes returning with stories of lands no map could place. Persian kings dispatched scouts to chart unclaimed territories, only to have them vanish into the horizon. The Romans, ever ambitious, pushed into North Africa's interior, but found the desert an opponent they could not conquer. In each of these encounters, the desert maintained its authority. It allowed glimpses of its treasures, a fertile oasis here, a ruin there, but never revealed all at once. The Golden City's legend fits seamlessly into this tradition, a prize shown only in part, enough to inspire pursuit, never enough to guarantee discovery. It is tempting to imagine the city as a silent player in the drama of empires, benefiting from their trade, learning from their cultures, yet remaining apart, untouched by their wars and politics. Perhaps its rulers preferred the anonymity of myth, knowing that to be known was to be claimed, taxed, and eventually conquered. In the quiet of the dunes, they could grow wealthy and wise without the burden of imperial attention. But anonymity comes with a price. A city hidden from the world is also hidden from help. When disaster came, whether in the form of drought, war, or something more mysterious. There would be no allies to call upon, no armies to defend its gates. And so the Golden City's fate may have been sealed not by its enemies, but by the very secrecy that had kept it safe for so long. From the vantage point of history, we are left with fragments, the names of empires that might have crossed its path, the records of caravans that might have passed its gates. None are conclusive, all are tantalizing, and with each unanswered question, the city's place in the imagination grows stronger. Beyond the reach of empires, beyond the limits of certainty, the Golden City lingers in the mind's eye, waiting for the next chapter in its story to unfold. The great empires built the roads, secured the borders, and raised the markets. But it was the merchants who truly knew the desert's heart. They were the veins of the ancient world, carrying not only silk and spices, but whispers and secrets. A merchant's caravan could be a moving archive, its cargo a mixture of goods, stories, and rumors, picked up in every stop along the way. If the Golden City existed, then somewhere it must have been a merchant who saw it first, walked its streets, and returned with more than gold in his saddlebag. Yet merchants are a careful breed. They speak in measures and weigh their words as they weigh their goods. Information, like precious incense, is valuable only if handled sparingly. A trader might hint at wonders beyond the dunes, a market that never sleeps, a well whose water tastes of sweetness, but he would seldom tell all. The reasons were many. Sometimes it was greed, the desire to be the sole link between supply and demand, to control the flow of rare goods without competition. Sometimes it was fear, for a city so wealthy might also be dangerous, ruled by those who preferred to keep strangers at a distance. And sometimes it was a merchant's instinct for self-preservation, knowing that too much talk could invite thieves, rivals, or the suspicious attention of kings. Imagine the merchant's road in the height of the trading season, camels swaying under the weight of silk bolts and sacks of saffron, donkeys carrying baskets of figs and almonds, leather waterskins clinking softly in the night. At the edge of the firelight, men exchange tales in low voices while their animals rest. Among the stories of distant wars and miraculous cures, a name might surface, a place unknown to most maps, the Golden City. It might come in the form of a boast: I have seen a market where gold changes hands as often as bread, or as a warning: beyond the third oasis lies a place that will take more than it gives, or even as a simple riddle: follow the wind, but only when it blows from the east. These fragments were passed from one merchant to another, crossing languages and borders, growing richer in some tellings, plainer in others. A Persian trader might describe the city's minarets gleaming like spears at dawn. A Berber caravan master might speak instead of gardens where fountains sang in the heat of midday. Each description was shaped by the teller's own culture, their own longing for what a perfect city should be. And yet, beneath these variations, a pattern emerges: abundance, isolation, and mystery. The Golden City was never described as crowded or vulnerable. It was always apart, an island in the desert, needing nothing from the outside world, choosing when and to whom it revealed itself. There were those who tried to buy the truth. Wealthy patrons in Damascus or Baghdad might pay handsomely for a merchant's itinerary, hoping to uncover the city's route. But merchants are seasoned negotiators. They might sell part of the story, a list of oases, a sketch of a landmark, but never the final clue. The rest they kept locked away in memory or in code. Some of these codes were clever. In certain trading ledgers, routes were marked not by place names but by symbols: a crescent for a safe oasis, a star for a dangerous pass, a cluster of dots for a settlement of interest. A scholar examining such a ledger centuries later might miss the significance, thinking them decorative marks. But to those in the know, they were a map, and somewhere on that map, perhaps, was the Golden City. There are even accounts of merchants using poetry as camouflage. In the courts of great cities, traders would recite verses that seemed romantic or mythical but were in fact descriptions of real places, encoded so that only fellow merchants could read between the lines. One such verse, preserved in a 12th century manuscript, speaks of a place where the sun rests twice a day, and where the air is sweeter than rosewater. Scholars debate whether this refers to an actual geographic feature or a purely symbolic ideal. The merchants' reluctance to share their secrets also had practical roots. The desert is vast, and life there depends on scarcity. An undiscovered city might remain safe so long as its location was guarded, but once word spread, it could be overrun by those seeking fortune, its resources drained, its people endangered. In this way, secrecy became not only a matter of profit, but of protection. Still, secrecy is never perfect. There are stories of chance discoveries, caravans blown off course by a sandstorm, stumbling upon a walled city shimmering in the dust. In these tales, the merchants are welcomed, feasted, and then sent away before they can commit the route to memory. Sometimes they are blindfolded for the journey out, sometimes they are guided only at night, the stars their companions and their jailers. One such account survives in the writings of Ibn al-Khatib, a 14th century Andalusian historian. He recounts the words of a merchant who claimed to have entered a golden walled city by accident after losing his way between two known oases. The merchant described streets paved with polished stone, fountains fed by channels hidden beneath the earth, and markets where coins were weighed, not for value but for fairness. When he awoke the next morning, his caravan had been moved outside the city walls and the gates were closed. He could not find the road back. Whether true or imagined, such tales only deepened the city's allure. Every vague direction, every cryptic verse, every unmarked symbol in a ledger became a potential clue. And so, the Golden City became a kind of shared obsession among traders, a story to be traded alongside frankincense and saffron, part of the invisible economy of desire. It is tempting to think that somewhere, perhaps in a chest sealed for generations, there still lies a merchant's journal that tells the whole truth, a map with all the symbols decoded, a route with every waypoint marked, a description of the city that leaves no doubt it was real. But if such a record exists, it has never surfaced, and maybe that is fitting. The merchant's secret is not just about a location, it is about the delicate balance between what is known and what is kept hidden, a balance that has allowed the Golden City to live on, not as a ruin to be studied, but as a vision to be pursued. For in the desert, as in trade, the promise is often more valuable than the possession. The desert is a master of illusion. From a distance, the rolling dunes appear unbroken, just oceans of gold, waves of sand, cresting and falling under the endless sky. Yet hidden within this apparent emptiness, there are places where the land remembers, places where stone, wind, and memory conspire to keep a story alive for thousands of years. Our journey now turns to the people who first noticed that this stretch of desert was not entirely dead, and to the traces they left behind for us to puzzle over. Long before satellite imagery and modern mapping tools, ancient travelers relied on their senses and instinct. Nomadic tribes moved across the land, their paths guided by wells, by stars, and by landmarks, barely perceptible to the untrained eye. For them, survival depended on reading the desert like a book, interpreting the subtle differences in sand color, the way the wind piled dunes in certain formations, the strange persistence of a plant where no water was visible. And sometimes these signs led them to something stranger still, fragments of worked stone, half-buried pillars and walls where no village was supposed to be. The oldest accounts we have are oral histories, passed down in songs and fireside stories. In the dialects of desert peoples, there are whispered references to the sleeping walls and the city that swallowed itself. These are not descriptions made by outsiders, they come from those whose lives were bound to this land for centuries. To them, the ruins were not the work of their ancestors, but of people long gone, from a time before even their oldest elders could imagine. And this recognition, that something here was both familiar in form yet alien in age, sparked stories of gods, curses, and lost kingdoms. Archaeologists today know that such stories are rarely pure invention. Beneath the mythology often lies a thread of truth, woven tightly into generations of retelling. As they surveyed the desert in the early 20th century, European and local researchers alike were surprised to find that the stories of the nomads corresponded with actual sites. Where elders spoke of the black stones marking an old city, there truly were basalt blocks, half buried and worn by centuries of storms. Where songs described the road that disappears under the sand, faint lines of stone paving could indeed be found, vanishing abruptly beneath the shifting dunes. These first finds were tantalizing, but they were also frustrating. The desert had buried the past so deeply that only fragments could be recovered, a carved lintel here, a corner of a wall there. The outlines of something far greater were suggested, but never revealed in full, and so speculation filled the gaps. Some scholars connected these scattered finds to the great trade routes of antiquity, imagining the buried city as a caravan hub where gold, incense and silk once passed through. Others believed it might have been a ceremonial center, dedicated to forgotten gods whose names had been lost to time. The contrast between the desert's vast emptiness and the intricate workmanship of these relics is almost poetic. To stumble upon a finely carved column base while surrounded by nothing but sand is to feel the fragility of human ambition. Once there were voices here, markets, celebrations, now there is only wind. And yet the wind is not silence. To some, it feels like a messenger carrying the echoes of those who once lived here. In the absence of written records, every clue is precious: pottery fragments with distinctive glazing, beads carved from stones not found in this region, and the faint remains of wall paintings, all hint at connections to distant cultures. Whoever built this city was not isolated. They were part of a wider world, exchanging goods and ideas far beyond the horizon. The golden sands may have hidden their city, but they could not erase the signs of their reach. And so, standing in this desolate place, one cannot help but feel watched, not in a sinister way, but with the weight of history's gaze. The ancient eyes of this section's title are not literal eyes, but the lingering presence of those who shaped these stones. Their lives are gone, their voices silent, yet their creations remain, peering out from the sand as if waiting to be remembered. The more researchers dug, carefully, methodically, the more they realized they were not uncovering a single isolated site, but the scattered remains of an entire urban footprint. Streets, plazas, and foundation lines emerged in patterns that spoke of planning and order. The city had been designed, not grown haphazardly. There was intention here. Purpose, but intention brings with it mystery. Why here? Why in the heart of such an unforgiving landscape? Was there once a river, now lost, an oasis, now swallowed by drought? Or was the desert itself different then, greener, and more forgiving? The answers remain elusive, lying just beyond the reach of certainty. The shadows lengthen as we linger on these questions. The sun dips low, and the same light that once shone upon bustling streets now falls upon the bare sand. Time has turned a place of life into a place of speculation, yet in the quiet of evening, when the wind's voice grows softer, you can almost imagine the figures of the past walking along those buried streets, unaware that their city would one day become a mystery whispered on the lips of travelers. And it is from these whispers that the hunt for the golden city truly begins. For if so many have spoken of it, if so many fragments remain, then perhaps, just perhaps, the city still waits beneath the sand, dreaming of the day it will be seen again. Beneath the sunlit dunes, the Golden City was more than just a settlement. It was a feat of engineering, the likes of which baffled even modern minds. The deeper archaeologists dug, the more they realized this was not a city that had merely grown by chance. It was meticulously planned, its bones set deep into the desert sands, with a precision that hinted at advanced understanding of geometry, architecture, and perhaps even sciences we still struggle to comprehend. Every wall seemed to align with a purpose. Some followed the cardinal directions, as though the builders possessed a deep knowledge of astronomy. Others curved in graceful arcs, their purpose, not immediately clear, until researchers noticed that at certain times of the year, the sunlight would spill perfectly along these paths, a dazzling corridor of gold, as if the city itself were a sundial. In the heart of the ruins, the remains of a colossal stone reservoir were unearthed. Despite centuries without maintenance, the walls were intact, their seams nearly invisible. The desert offered little in the way of fresh water, yet here the citizens had harnessed underground aquifers, channeling life into their city through hidden cisterns and a network of ceramic pipes. These pipes, some still sealed tight after millennia, suggested an understanding of hydraulic engineering centuries ahead of their time. Archaeologists also uncovered a series of wind towers, tall, narrow structures designed to funnel desert breezes into the city. These acted as a form of natural air conditioning, cooling the interiors even during the height of summer. To imagine such foresight is to imagine a people who were not merely surviving the desert but mastering it, bending its harshness into something almost comfortable. But perhaps the most puzzling of all were the foundations. Unlike most ancient cities built on stone or clay, the Golden City's base rested on an intricate lattice of compressed sand and resin, a technique unknown in any other culture of the region. This created a shock-absorbing platform, one that allowed the city to withstand the slow but relentless shifting of the dunes. As researchers pieced together these discoveries, a question began to loom larger: how had these engineers learned such techniques? No written records had yet been found to explain the transmission of this knowledge. Had it been inherited from an even older civilization now lost to history, or had it been developed here in isolation, by a community driven to defy their environment? And then came the whispers, found not in stone tablets, but in oral traditions, passed down through desert tribes. Some claimed that the builders had been guided by star messengers, beings who taught them the secrets of the earth and sky before vanishing back into the heavens. Others insisted the knowledge came from survivors of a great flood, who had once ruled lands now buried beneath the ocean. The archaeologists, bound to the evidence, could not confirm such legends, yet they could not ignore the uncanny perfection of the city's design. Every stone, every channel, every column seemed to hum with intention, as though it were part of a larger puzzle that had not yet been solved. Standing in the ruins today, it is easy to imagine the engineers at work, measuring shadows, mapping constellations, carving stones under the cool night sky. The wind would have carried the sound of chisels and the murmur of voices, a rhythm that would one day be replaced by silence. And in that silence, the city would wait for centuries for someone to remember its story. In uncovering these engineering marvels, modern researchers did more than reconstruct a city's blueprint. They glimpsed the minds of those who had lived here, their blend of artistry and practicality, their quiet defiance of nature's limits. The city had not merely been a place to live, it had been a statement: we can endure here. We can thrive here, we can make the desert ours. And yet, for all their brilliance, the engineers could not prevent what was coming, a fate that would turn the shining streets into silent shadows beneath the sand. From here, the narrative drifts toward the forces, both human and environmental, that conspired to bring this masterpiece to ruin. The Golden City had mastered the desert, or so it seemed. For generations, its people lived in harmony with the shifting sands, their reservoirs full, their markets bustling with goods brought by caravans from distant lands. But the desert is patient, and patience is a kind of power. Slowly, quietly, it began to reclaim what had been taken from it. The first signs were subtle. Traders from the north spoke of altered routes, forced to skirt newly formed dunes. Wells that had flowed for centuries began to taste of salt. Farmers along the city's outskirts found their once fertile fields turning to brittle dust. No single event spelled disaster, rather, it was the gradual tightening of an invisible hand. Historians believe a shift in climate may have played a role, a slow drying of the air that deepened with each passing year. The aquifers, though ingeniously tapped, began to recede. The wind towers still cooled the city, but the air they carried was sharper, carrying the sting of sandstorms that battered the once pristine walls. And yet, the city might still have endured, had it not been for the human storms that followed. Records from neighboring civilizations, scratched into clay tablets or painted onto temple walls, tell of political unrest, of rival powers, circling like vultures. The Golden City's wealth was no secret. It glimmered in the imagination of kings and warlords, far beyond the desert's edge. One such power, an empire hungry for control of the trade routes, began to probe the city's defenses. At first it was merchants who arrived, speaking in honeyed tones, but asking too many questions about storage vaults and caravan schedules. Then came envoys, bearing gifts in one hand and thinly veiled demands in the other. And finally, soldiers not in open war, but in quiet incursions, testing the city's patience and resources. The Golden City responded with dignity and caution, but the strain showed. Wealth that had once funded art and architecture was diverted to fortifications. The elegant plazas grew quieter, their fountains still flowing but no longer places of music and laughter. In the archives of later centuries, a single phrase appears again and again in reference to this time. The light began to dim. Even within the city walls, unity frayed. Some factions urged an alliance with the encroaching empire, believing survival more important than independence. Others clung fiercely to tradition, unwilling to bend. As arguments sharpened into hostility, the shared purpose that had built the city's marvels began to dissolve. Then came the storms, not political, but real and merciless. A season unlike any in living memory swept through the desert. Winds howled for days without pause, burying roads, toppling outer watchtowers, and choking the air with dust so thick that day seemed like dusk. The golden streets were swallowed in waves of sand, drifts piling high against the very walls that had once defied the desert. It is said that during one such storm, the city's great gate disappeared beneath a dune overnight. Caravans could no longer find the entrance, trade stalled, and with it, the lifeblood of the city. Granaries once overflowing began to empty. People left, some to seek refuge with relatives in distant oases, others to follow traders who promised safer lands. The decline was not a single moment of collapse, but a slow unraveling. Decades passed, and the city that had once dazzled travelers became a ghost of itself. The wind towers still stood, but they whistled through empty halls. The markets were silent, their stalls abandoned. The great reservoir, marvel of ancient engineering, held only a shallow stagnant pool, and yet, even as its heart faded, the city clung to a certain dignity. A few families stayed, tending what little water remained, sweeping sand from the steps of temples no longer in use. They spoke of a prophecy, that one day the desert would give back what it had taken, and the Golden City would rise again. But the desert keeps its secrets well. In time, even those final caretakers were gone, their footsteps erased by the shifting dunes. The walls that had stood for centuries vanished beneath a golden shroud, their sharp lines softened by the wind. Only the tallest spire, weathered and cracked, peaked above the sands, a lonely sentinel watching over a city no one could see. Centuries later, travelers passed by without knowing they were walking over the roofs of once magnificent palaces. The Golden City became a whisper in the wind, a tale told by desert tribes around their campfires. Some called it a legend, others swore it was real, that beneath the dunes lay treasures beyond imagining. It would be hundreds of years before the sand shifted enough for the first hints of stone to appear again. And even then, the city did not give itself up easily. The desert had hidden it too well, as if guarding it from unworthy eyes. What remained beneath the sand was not just the story of decline, but the echo of a civilization that had once mastered both art and survival, and then vanished, not with a crash, but with a long sighing breath. From here the story moves forward to the moment of rediscovery, when the Golden City's long silence was finally broken, and its secrets began to see the light once more. The story of the Golden City, glittering beneath the sands, and shimmering in the imagination, has never belonged to just one voice. It is a tapestry of interpretations, woven by historians, archaeologists, linguists, theologians, and dreamers. In this section, the narrative shifts to the heart of the scholarly debate. Is the Golden City a relic of a real civilization lost to time, or is it a myth refined and reshaped across centuries to inspire, warn, or control? The answer, like the desert wind, changes direction depending on who is speaking. The academic discussion begins with the archaeologists, grounded in the discipline of material evidence. They point to fragments of worked stone, unusual architectural alignments, and carbon-dated relics that suggest human habitation in the very regions where the legend places the city. These findings are tantalizing, yet incomplete, like torn pages from an ancient book. Each artifact sparks questions. Were these truly remnants of a central city of gold, or just the scattered remains of unrelated settlements, their importance exaggerated over time? Across the table, historians turn to the written word. They scour ancient scrolls, inscriptions, and travelers' accounts, comparing the earliest known mentions of the city. Some texts describe it in practical terms: a fortified trade hub, rich from the convergence of caravan routes. Others speak of impossible opulence, streets lined with gold, fountains of crystal water, and gardens blooming in defiance of the desert. To the historians, this contrast suggests a kernel of truth, later embroidered into legend. Yet others argue the reverse, that the city was never real at all, but a moral tale dressed in the grandeur of fantasy. Then there are the linguists, who focus on how the very name of the Golden City has shifted across languages and eras. In some tongues, its name means the sun's resting place. In others, the House of Dawn, or the Land of 1,000 Towers. Linguists propose that these transformations hint at different cultural lenses, each shaping the city's image to match its own values and fears. Could these changes be evidence of a real place, known across vast distances, or do they reveal a story so compelling that it traveled freely, untethered to any single reality? Theologians bring yet another layer. To them, the Golden City is less a geographical puzzle and more a spiritual metaphor. In sacred texts, the city appears as a reward for the faithful, or as a warning to the arrogant. Some religious traditions claim it was a divine creation, hidden away when humanity strayed from the path of virtue. Others believe it lies in wait, destined to reappear at the end of days as a sign of redemption or judgment. Here the physical and the symbolic become inseparable. The city exists not merely in sand or stone, but in the moral architecture of belief. Finally, the mystics and seekers, often dismissed by academia, see the city as both real and not real, existing in a liminal space between worlds. They speak of it as a place one can reach only through visions, dreams, or spiritual awakening. In their telling, the desert is not just a barrier of earth and heat, but a veil between dimensions. For them, the Golden City is not lost, it simply waits for the right kind of eyes to see it. What makes this debate so enduring is that each perspective seems to circle the truth without fully touching it. Evidence is always partial, texts are always interpretable, belief, whether in stone or spirit, is shaped by the lens through which it is viewed. The Golden City may be a place, a parable, or perhaps something stranger still, an idea powerful enough to shape both history and imagination. This section closes on the image of an empty conference hall after a day of heated discussion. The scholars have gone, their papers stacked neatly, their notes left in the margins, yet in the silence, the mystery remains untouched, like the shifting dunes themselves, never holding one shape for long. The story now moves from academic discourse to those who claim to have actually set foot in the Golden City, blurring the line between debate and experience. While scholars debate in libraries and lecture halls, there are others, men and women of every age, who insist they have seen the Golden City, not as a theory, but as a living reality. Their testimonies, recorded in travel journals, oral traditions, and whispered confidences, range from the vividly detailed to the barely believable. Some are seasoned explorers, hardened by years of crossing deserts and mountains. Others are wanderers, who claim to have stumbled upon the city by accident, guided by chance, fate, or perhaps something stranger. The earliest known account comes from a 9th century merchant, whose caravan was blown off course by a violent sandstorm. In his surviving diary, preserved in a monastery far from the desert, he describes waking to see walls that burned with the light of the sun and water flowing through silver channels in streets clean as mirrors. His writing is filled with awe, but also fear. The inhabitants, he says, spoke no language he knew, and their eyes held the weight of centuries. He claimed to have been led to the city's gates, offered food and drink, and then, after only a few hours, escorted back into the dunes, where the city vanished behind him, as if swallowed by the horizon. Centuries later, a 16th century Jesuit missionary recorded a strikingly similar tale. Lost while seeking a distant mission outpost, he wrote of stumbling upon a city where no shadow fell, and where gold seemed not a treasure, but a building material. He was convinced it was a divine vision meant to test his humility. When he returned to the nearest settlement and tried to retrace his steps, every landmark he remembered was gone, replaced by shifting dunes and unfamiliar rock formations. In the 19th century, during the golden age of exploration, the number of claimed sightings surged. Newspapers in Europe and America printed breathless reports of soldiers, fortune seekers, and adventurers who swore they had reached a city of unparalleled wealth, hidden in the desert's heart. Some described markets overflowing with rare spices, jewels, and fabrics of impossible fineness. Others focused on the silence, streets without voices, fountains without sound, as though the entire city held its breath. Yet the most haunting testimonies are the ones that contradict one another in uncanny ways. One traveler claimed the Golden City was surrounded by lush gardens and rivers, a paradise of green in the desert. Another, speaking only months later, swore the city was nothing but white stone and sunlight, with not a blade of grass in sight. Both were adamant, both convinced they were telling the truth. Modern accounts are rarer, but no less strange. In the late 20th century, a French archaeologist named Dr. Lucienne Moreau vanished while mapping an uncharted section of desert. She was found 3 weeks later, dehydrated, but alive, clutching a leather-bound notebook. The notebook contained sketches of elaborate towers, sweeping arches, and intricate mosaics, all rendered with the precision of someone who had stood before them. She refused to speak publicly about what she had seen, offering only this: "It is not lost, it is simply not for everyone." Among the most mysterious reports are those from individuals who never physically traveled to the desert at all. A handful of people claim to have seen the Golden City in dreams, dreams so vivid they woke with sand clinging to their feet, or with coins of unknown metal on their bedside tables. Scientists dismiss these as tricks of the mind, but others see them as proof that the city may exist on a plane beyond the purely physical. These eyewitness accounts are both compelling and problematic. They are rich in detail, yet impossible to verify. They speak of the same place, yet disagree on its size, shape, and surroundings. Some skeptics argue that these tales are simply the product of imagination, greed, or heat-induced hallucination. Others believe the contradictions are themselves a clue, that the city changes for each visitor, reflecting not only the landscape, but the inner state of the one who finds it. The section closes with a reflection on what these testimonies mean for the search. If the Golden City exists, then it is more than just stone and gold. It is an entity that chooses when, where, and to whom it reveals itself. The next part of our journey will explore the attempts to map this elusive wonder, the cartographers, the satellite imagery, and the modern expeditions determined to fix the Golden City's position once and for all, no matter how it tries to hide. In the age of satellites, GPS, and high-resolution aerial photography, it might seem impossible for any city, let alone one supposedly shimmering with gold, to remain hidden. And yet, despite decades of effort, the Golden City has evaded every attempt to pin it to a map. Its absence is as conspicuous as its legend, and modern expeditions have only deepened the enigma. The earliest scientific efforts to chart its location began in the 1920s, when colonial surveyors in North Africa and the Middle East heard local tales of a city where the sun sleeps on gold. These early teams carried compasses, sextants, and crude aerial cameras, convinced they could do what generations before them could not. Their field notes are frustratingly familiar: stories of shimmering mirages, sudden sandstorms, and unexplainable changes in the landscape that rendered their maps useless. By the 1970s, technology had improved dramatically. Explorers began using small aircraft, and later satellites, to scan vast desert regions. They detected strange geometric patterns beneath the sands, lines and rectangles too regular to be natural. But when ground teams reached these coordinates, they found nothing but windswept emptiness. One geologist, baffled by the repeated failures, remarked, "It's as if the desert erases our approach before we arrive." Then came the great push of the 1990s and early 2000s, when private adventurers, sponsored by wealthy patrons and media networks, launched expeditions with unprecedented resources. Helicopters ferried supplies to remote base camps, while thermal imaging searched for buried structures. A British team in 1998 claimed to have located a massive reflective surface deep in a restricted desert zone. However, when they returned with clearance to investigate, the signal was gone, and the reflective anomaly no longer appeared in the satellite data. Some expeditions have been more perilous than others. In 2005, a joint French-American ventured into a little mapped stretch of the Sahara, following what they believed was a centuries-old caravan route. 2 vehicles broke down, forcing the team to proceed on foot. They reported hearing a low metallic hum at night, an inexplicable vibration that seemed to come from beneath the ground. 3 days later, they stumbled upon a dry riverbed lined with oddly worked stones. The find was documented and samples collected, but a sudden sandstorm destroyed most of their equipment. Back in the lab, the stones were dated to an era when, according to mainstream archaeology, no advanced settlement existed in the region. Even the most cutting-edge tools have fared no better. In the past decade, high-definition LiDAR, light detection and ranging, has revolutionized the discovery of lost cities in dense jungles, yet the desert's shifting sands confound the same technology. Structures vanish into dunes, or are revealed in fleeting moments, only to disappear as wind reshapes the terrain. A 2017 LiDAR survey, funded by a Middle Eastern university, hinted at massive subsurface voids in a suspected location, but budget cuts halted further research. Beyond the technological hurdles lies another problem: access. Many of the regions where the Golden City is said to be located fall within politically unstable zones, or areas controlled by nomadic tribes who guard their lands fiercely. Permission to enter can take years to secure, if it comes at all. Some researchers have resorted to working through local guides, relying on oral traditions and navigational knowledge passed down for centuries. And then there are the accounts of expeditions that never return. Officially, these are attributed to natural hazards, heat stroke, dehydration, vehicle breakdowns. But whispers in the exploration community suggest something more unsettling: that some who set out to find the Golden City simply choose not to come back. Whether they perished, found something, or decided to disappear into a place no one else could follow remains unknown. One of the most intriguing developments in recent years has come from a completely different angle: crowdsourced exploration. Amateur historians, satellite hobbyists, and armchair archaeologists have been combing through freely available imagery, marking potential anomalies for professionals to investigate. A handful of these digital sleuths claim to have found repeating patterns, subtle, almost imperceptible, suggesting the city appears in different places over time. If true, it would mean the Golden City is not fixed in space at all, but a moving phenomenon, perhaps even a mirage with physical properties. Modern expeditions into the Golden City's mystery seem to follow a pattern. Each begins with optimism, armed with better tools and newer maps. Each returns with more questions than answers, and each leaves behind a growing body of data, coordinates, photographs, environmental readings, that, while fascinating, fail to prove the city's existence. Yet the pursuit continues. In 2024, a multinational team announced an ambitious plan, a year-long AI-assisted survey, combining drone swarms, ground-penetrating radar, and local oral history in real-time mapping. The project, called Aurora Dunes, is currently underway. Whether it will succeed, or join the long list of failed attempts, remains to be seen. For now, the Golden City remains the ultimate cartographic challenge, its precise location, like its true nature, slipping through the fingers of those who try to hold it. And as the mapmakers and scientists push forward, the legend grows, drawing yet more seekers into the desert's embrace. There are some truths that never find their way into ink and parchment. They exist only in the hush of campfire conversations, in the measured pauses of an elder's tale, or in the trembling voice of someone who swears they have seen the impossible. The desert, for all its silence, is never truly mute. It whispers, through the sigh of the wind, through the hiss of shifting dunes, and through the mouths of those who have made this sea of sand their home for countless generations. To the outsider, these may seem like fables, charming but insubstantial. Yet for those who listen closely, the stories form a map of their own, an invisible chart, pointing to something just beyond the reach of written history. In the markets of a distant oasis town, a traveler might hear of the City of Mirrors, a golden city that glimmers under the sand when the sun is high, only to vanish the moment a human shadow falls upon it. In another tent, an old herder might speak of the king who sleeps, entombed in a palace of crystal and guarded by jinn until the day the sands part willingly. And there are darker tales of wanderers lured off their path by flickering lights, their footprints filling in behind them until no trace remains. These are not stories born of idle imagination. They are the slow accumulation of centuries of sightings, of dreams, of warnings. The oral traditions describe landmarks no modern map records, mountains that seem to move, rivers that appear after rain and vanish without a trace, and singing dunes that hum low melodies on still nights. Elders speak of a particular constellation, visible only during certain months, that points the way to a forbidden horizon. You will not find this in any astronomical guide, yet desert navigators swear by it. Perhaps most intriguingly, some of these folk tales are echoed almost word for word in regions separated by hundreds of miles, different tribes, different dialects, but the same imagery: golden gates, half-buried walls of sunstone, and a silence so deep it seems to press against the eardrums. Anthropologists suggest this is the residue of a shared memory, passed down and reshaped, surviving where physical ruins could not. To the local people, these aren't legends to be proven or disproven. They are living truths, bound not to the logic of archaeology, but to the spirit of the desert. It is in this web of folklore that the Golden City lives most vividly. No matter what modern surveys find, or fail to find, these stories will outlast them. They are a kind of immortality, woven into lullabies, carved into walking sticks, and whispered to children, who will one day inherit both the land and its mysteries. And in this way, the Golden City is not just a place buried under the sand, it is a place that exists in the minds and hearts of those who tell its story, forever shifting, forever shining, and forever just beyond the reach of those who seek it. The first spades broke the sand, in cautious, deliberate motions. This was not the kind of excavation that came with fanfare, or the clicking of cameras. It was quieter, more uncertain, as if the archaeologists feared that disturbing the desert too quickly might cause it to close again, over whatever secrets it held. For years the Golden City had lived entirely in rumor, in caravan gossip, and the murmurs of those who swore they had glimpsed something extraordinary far out in the dunes. Yet here, at the edge of a half-forgotten wadi, the sand began to give up signs that the stories might not be pure invention. At first it was nothing remarkable, shards of pottery, weathered smooth, fragments of worked stone that could have come from any settlement. But as the dig deepened, patterns began to emerge, a segment of what appeared to be a carved lintel, its design unlike the geometric patterns common to the region. A cluster of stone blocks precisely cut, lying in a formation, too deliberate to be natural. And then, a sound. One of the archaeologists noticed it first. When their boots pressed against certain parts of the ground, there was a hollow resonance beneath. It was faint, but unmistakable, as though the sand concealed a space below, a chamber or corridor sealed for centuries. In the days that followed, the team worked with increasing care. The wind was an ever-present adversary, erasing their progress almost as quickly as they made it. Even so, they uncovered what looked to be the top of a buried wall, the stones locked together with a precision suggesting advanced craftsmanship. Fossilized wood was found nearby, its grain preserved in the arid climate, rare evidence of construction materials, transported from far-off lands. There was excitement, but also hesitation. The site lay deep in territory, where shifting sands could swallow entire expeditions. Every move required calculation. Every night the desert reclaimed a little more of the day's work. Some of the locals hired as guides refused to approach after sunset, claiming that the wind around the site carried voices. To the scientists, it was nothing more than the eerie acoustics of the dunes, but the timing of these whispers, always in the stillness before dawn, was hard to ignore. As artifacts accumulated, a pattern took shape. The designs carved into stone fragments bore no exact match to any known civilization, yet hints of multiple influences were present. Flourishes reminiscent of Mesopotamian art, motifs familiar from North African trade cities, even a stylized wave pattern found in coastal cultures. It was as though the builders had drawn from a mosaic of worlds, combining them into something singular. Still, the deeper chambers remained elusive. Ground-penetrating surveys revealed vague shapes, arched voids, perhaps doorways, maybe even whole rooms, but the equipment could not provide enough detail. The city remained stubbornly hidden, allowing only glimpses of itself, as though testing the patience of those who sought it. One evening, as the sun fell and the desert's colors shifted to muted gold, the lead archaeologist stood at the edge of the excavation and stared at the half-buried wall. It was not just a wall, it was a promise that beneath these dunes, beneath centuries of wind and time, something extraordinary waited. Whether it was a forgotten trade hub, a ceremonial complex, or the fabled golden city itself, remained uncertain, but the evidence was undeniable. The legend had roots in the ground, not just in the imagination, and so the excavation continued. Each grain of sand removed a tiny victory against the long silence of the desert. Somewhere below, the past waited patiently, knowing it could outlast those who sought it. While archaeologists sifted through the sand with brushes and trowels, another search was unfolding, not in the earth, but in memory, in small desert villages, and among the scattered tribes that still followed the shifting seasons. There were people who carried the stories of their ancestors in their voices. An old man, with a face lined like a weathered map, spoke of a city that had no shadow because its walls shimmered as though made of sunlight. A woman who spun wool by the fire recounted a tale of merchants arriving at night, their camels laden with treasures, who vanished by dawn, as if the desert had swallowed them whole. Another told of a king who forbade anyone to speak the city's true name, fearing that uttering it aloud would invite disaster. At first, these tales seemed like fragments of unrelated folklore, shimmering walls, vanished caravans, forbidden names. But when the researchers began to compare them side by side, patterns began to emerge. The same constellation of details appeared again and again, a settlement deep in the dunes, richer than any known city, yet cursed with a fate that erased it from maps. The stories varied in tone. Some were told with wonder, as though remembering a paradise. Others carried a note of dread, describing the city as a place where beauty hid something dangerous, and opulence bought at the cost of its soul. One Bedouin elder leaned close to the recorder and whispered, "It was not gold they feared losing, it was what guarded the gold." Pressed for clarity, he only smiled, the kind of smile that says you already know the answer, if you dare think about it. The researchers, accustomed to verifiable data, found themselves drawn into this web of superstition and symbolism. For them, the oral histories were another kind of map, imprecise, yes, but pointing toward truths buried under centuries of retelling. And in a way, these voices preserved something the stones alone could not, the human awe and fear that the Golden City inspired. A breakthrough came when one young linguist noticed that the word used for city in several unrelated dialects sounded almost the same, a low, breathy syllable, heavy with sibilance. It was not a word found in any written record. Was it the original name, or merely a sound meant to mimic the wind over the dunes? No one could say. But whenever it was spoken, even in casual conversation, the listeners fell silent as though instinctively showing respect to something older than their own language. Even the skeptics could not deny the value of these narratives. They revealed not just a possible location, but a mood, a way the city was perceived by those who lived in its shadow, or at least in the shadow of its legend. They told of trade routes that curved unnaturally to avoid certain valleys, of nights when the sand glowed faintly under the moon, of travelers who followed a distant gleam only to find themselves hopelessly lost. For the local people, the Golden City was never just a physical place. It was a warning, a temptation, a reminder that not all treasures are meant to be found, and for the archaeologists, it was becoming clear that any attempt to uncover it would mean confronting not just the physical dangers of the desert, but the weight of centuries of belief. As the voices of the elders faded into the crackling of campfires and the long sigh of the night wind, the team realized that they were hearing more than just stories. They were hearing the city itself, its echo carried not in stone, but in human memory, stubbornly enduring where walls had fallen. The decision was not made lightly. Months of preparation preceded the journey. A quiet, methodical gathering of supplies, permits, guides, and above all, trust. Maps were rolled and unrolled until their creases deepened into permanent scars. Every scrap of information from the oral histories was overlaid with satellite images, marking points where legend and geography seemed to meet. The caravan would be small by ancient standards, just enough to carry the essentials, yet light enough to move quickly if the desert turned hostile. There were camels, their patient eyes reflecting the slow knowledge of many crossings, four-wheel drive vehicles for the more treacherous terrain, and pack animals carrying barrels of water, as precious as any gold they might find. Every rope was coiled, every compass checked twice. The morning they set out, the desert lay before them in a muted haze, the horizon blurring into a pale sky. The air was cool, almost gentle, but every member of the team knew it was only a matter of hours before the sun's weight pressed down like a great invisible hand. They moved in silence at first, the crunch of sand under boots and the low groan of saddles the only sounds. It felt almost ceremonial, as though they were not just crossing land but entering a long-negotiated agreement with the desert itself. Days blurred into one another. They rose before the sun, walking in the thin ribbon of shade their own bodies cast. By midday they halted to rest beneath stretched canvas, the heat outside, so fierce it seemed to shimmer in the air like something alive. Nights were a different world. Cool winds whispered over the dunes, and the stars looked close enough to reach out and scatter like grains of salt. The guides told stories to pass the time, their voices blending with the hiss of sand sliding down the slopes of the dunes. They spoke of ancient routes once marked by stone cairns, now swallowed by the wind of oases that moved, appearing in new places as if they had grown restless. Occasionally, a shape would appear on the horizon, a dark smudge that might be rock or might be ruin, but as they approached, it would dissolve into nothing more than shadow and light. One evening, after the campfires had burned down to embers, The lead guide sat apart from the others, staring into the dark. When asked what he saw, he replied simply, "The desert changes you. It decides what you are allowed to see, and when you are allowed to see it." The archaeologists exchanged glances, not entirely sure whether he meant it as a warning or as reassurance. By the sixth day, something began to shift. The terrain flattened, the dunes giving way to a vast plain where the sand was darker, more compact. Here the wind carried with it the faint scent of minerals, as though the earth beneath was not entirely sand at all. The guides began to walk with more purpose, scanning the distance, exchanging quiet words in a dialect the outsiders did not fully understand. That night, the wind rose, it rattled the tent flaps and hissed through the ropes, a restless, whispering sound. Some said it was nothing more than the desert breathing, but one of the elders among the guides claimed it was the city itself, sensing their approach and deciding whether to welcome them or turn them away. At dawn on the seventh day, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind had stilled overnight, leaving the desert unnaturally quiet. When the team emerged from their tents, the horizon lay crisp and sharp, without the usual wavering distortions of heat. The sun was just rising, its first light spilling across the sand in long golden strokes, painting every ripple and ridge in delicate shadow. The lead guide walked a few paces ahead, scanning the distance. Then he stopped. Slowly, he raised his hand, pointing toward a faint outline that shimmered in the far-off haze. At first, no one spoke. They simply stared, unsure if their eyes were playing the same tricks the desert had played countless times before. But this was different. It was not the fleeting shimmer of heat mirage. The shapes did not vanish when they looked directly at them. There was geometry here, angles where no natural dune would form them, vertical lines that caught the light differently than sand. It was as if the desert had been hiding a secret behind a veil, and for the first time the veil had shifted. They walked toward it slowly, careful not to blink too long, as though a single glance away might cause the vision to dissolve. Each step brought more detail into focus. The outline became a cluster of low walls, their tops uneven but unmistakably human in construction. Beyond them, a higher structure rose, its base partially buried, its surface weathered into a soft sun-bleached texture that suggested centuries of wind and sand. The air seemed cooler here, though no shadow yet reached them. It was the kind of cooling that came not from temperature but from presence, the sense of being in a place that had absorbed the breath and footsteps of people long gone. The team paused, just outside what might once have been the city's boundary. The archaeologist in charge removed his hat almost without thinking, as if entering a sacred place. Even the camels grew quieter, their usual low groans replaced by a still watchfulness. One of the guides knelt and brushed the sand aside with his hand. Beneath lay a fragment of worked stone, its surface etched with patterns so faint they seemed to waver in the light. It was impossible to tell if they were decorative motifs or some form of script, but they were deliberate. Man-made evidence. They did not rush in. Instead, they stood at the edge, drinking in the sight in silence. The city was not large, no grand skyline, no towering citadel. It seemed almost modest in its scale, as if it had been designed to remain hidden rather than to dominate the landscape. Yet there was an undeniable elegance in its layout, even half buried as it was. One of the younger archaeologists whispered, "It's real, it's actually real." The words felt almost too loud in the open air, as if they might alert the desert to their discovery and cause it to change its mind. The lead guide finally turned to the group and said in a low voice, "The city shows itself when it wishes to be remembered. Today, it has chosen you." With that they stepped forward together, their shadows falling for the first time across the stones of the lost city.